Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Sundays. I'm so glad that you could be with us tonight and share in this evening with my very special guest, Katherine Woodward Thomas. Hi, Katherine.
Hi, Ora. Hi, everyone.
I want to tell you a little bit about Sacred Sundays. Well, before I do, let me tell you a little bit about me. For those of you that don't know me, I am Ora Nadrich, and I am a certified life coach. I'm a certified mindfulness meditation teacher and the author of Says Who, How One Simple Question Can Change the Way You Think Forever. It's a method that I created for transforming negative and fear-based thoughts. And Sacred Sundays came to be, I had this thought, this vision, whatever you want to call it. I remembered out of my past, I was thinking about my childhood, and I thought about Sundays and what Sundays meant to me and what Sundays were like when I was growing up. And Sundays for me felt very sacred. That was the word that came up for me. Sundays were a day where we were together as a family. I'm one of four, the youngest of four, and my father was a very spiritual man, a very philosophical man, and very versed in Kabbalah. How many of you know about the Kabbalah? It's a book of Jewish mysticism. It's thought of as the soul of the Torah, and it was a day where he would teach us about the Kabbalah, and it was a day where he would watch all the religious programs on TV. All the evangelists, all the ministers, listen to the sermons, and it was very fascinating for me because he was just completely compelled to bring this into our home. And it felt very sacred. It felt like it was a day of not working, a day of reflecting, a day of contemplating the universe and the meaning of God and what are we doing here. And as much as maybe we didn't subscribe to the religion of the person that was representing the spiritual talk, if you will, it was the overall feeling that I imbibed was that this is a day where we connect with something higher. This is a day where we have our own personal conversations with God. And that was really very powerful for me as a young girl. So I thought about that, and I thought, Sacred Sundays, I want to do something that feels like that. I want to do something where we gather together collectively as a group, as a community, and we have our versions of connecting to something higher, to connecting to something that lends itself to raising consciousness. And I thought, what a great place to do this in at Mystic Journey Bookstore, which I have done some events here and book signings, and I love it here. And they're very welcoming, and it's a beautiful store. And as you can see, it's got just a very lovely energy with the crystals and the books and all that goes on here. Come on in, come on. So I talked about it with Ben Decker, my cohort, and Ben Decker and Jules Nugent work with me together to create. They're my co-creators, and we talked about doing this very special gathering called Sacred Sundays, and so that's how that was born. It also connected me to the first women's group that I had many, many years ago. I had a women's group, and that was a sacred gathering for me. I sought out spiritual elders. I wanted to be around, sacred circles go way back from the beginning of when, men were hunters and gatherers and women kept the hearth and the home going, and we're in a sacred circle, and that also really resonated for me. And I had my first one many, many years ago that was amazing with healers and shamans and priestesses. And I learned so much from that sacred circles. So sacred circles, sacred gatherings, sacred Sundays. That was what was really resonating for me. And then years later, when I became a certified life coach, I created another women's group. So that's the backstory, excuse me, of how Sacred Sundays came to be. So I'd like to start with going into a meditation, but before I do, I want to welcome Katherine Woodward Thomas, who, a little bit about Katherine and I, if you will. We were recently together in Israel. We had a sacred journey together, right? Our dear friend Marianne Williamson put together this very special journey, again, in a very sacred place, Israel. And that's where I connected with Katherine, and I've admired her work very much, but didn't really know, we didn't know each other, even though we've probably been at similar events for Marianne. And we got to spend some really lovely time together and have just, I remember us sitting on the steps in Jerusalem in the marketplace and having a beautiful conversation and walking on the cobblestone streets together, arm in arm, not knowing each other very well, but just a immediate connection. I just felt this warm, welcoming familiarity with you. And for those of you that don't know about Katherine, I want to give you a little back story on her. She is a best-selling author and respected relationship expert with more than 2 decades as a licensed therapist and an international following of hundreds of thousands who have attended her online courses, advanced training, and coaching certifications on finding love and women's empowerment, which we gotta love that. Yes, absolutely. And her first book was Calling in the One, a national bestseller, and saving the best for last, her New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling, which I'm sure everybody in this room has heard about Conscious Uncoupling because it is in the ether big time, okay? 5 steps to living happily even after. I love that, by the way. That is so great. Okay, so it was after this media storm, right, when Gwyneth Paltrow announced her separation from Chris Martin, describing it as a harmonious and mutual conscious uncoupling. And the term entered the world's vocabulary overnight. So we really have to give Katherine a tremendous amount of credit for really raising the bar for separating, uncoupling, divorcing, whatever you want to call it. I don't know of any term that was used prior that had that type of consciousness, which is a perfect title, Conscious Uncoupling. We never had that before. And this has set a whole new precedent, and it will, I think, have a tremendous effect on many generations to come. It's like a roadmap, it's a guide. It's really something that I think most people, if you ask them, would probably want to subscribe to do, but maybe don't necessarily know how. So we have Katherine to thank for really, again, setting a whole new precedent in conscious relationships. So thank you, Katherine, for being my guest here tonight. Why don't we begin with a meditation? Why don't we begin with connecting in this room together? Wonderful. Okay, why doesn't everybody just find your space? Find your space in your chair. Close your eyes if they're not already closed. And feel yourself sitting here in your chair in this moment. Feel yourself in this room, sharing this space with other people, feeling whatever you're feeling energetically, being aware of any thoughts that might be active or present in your mind, and be the observer. Allow yourself to be in the moment of now. Take a deep breath in and let it go. Another deep breath in and let it go. Feel yourself here in this moment that is the most real moment that you are in, because you are alive in this moment right now. Value it, welcome it, honor it, appreciate it, and let it just reveal to you what it wants you to know. The moment, although it's just 60 seconds, in this container of time, it's eternal. There is no past. It has come and gone. And the future has not yet come. Therefore, the moment that you are in right now is perfectly divine and designed for you to know that you are here with total awareness, acceptance, and non-judgment. I am here is the mantra. I am here. Feel the energy moving from the bottom of the soles of your feet up through your legs, up to your solar plexus, the core, the center of your being. Feel yourself connect. Feel yourself be present. Feel yourself here. Feel the energy moving up to your heart chakra, opening, welcoming, inviting this moment of now. Feel the energy move up to your throat chakra. Feel the warmth of that in the voice of your truth. Feel the energy move up to the space between your brow, your third eye, the wisdom of knowing. And keep that energy moving up to your crown chakra, the top of your head. And see an orb of white light around the crown of your head, opening to let go of any energy that you want to release right now, and bringing in the energy of light and love that you wish to receive. And feel the energy complete in your entire being. Feel your breath moving up and down on your chest. Put your hand on your heart. Feel your heart beating. How alive you are right now in this moment. You and your breath, you and your deep knowing of this moment and what it means to be you with total acceptance. And when you're ready, bring your focus and your awareness back to your body. And remember this space that you're in. It doesn't leave you. It is always there. And open your eyes when you're ready. Katherine, can you hear me? Yes. Holding this up close. All right. So I talked about this media frenzy that happened when, I'm sure you've been asked this so many times, right? Yeah. So when that happened, and it's my understanding that you were in Costa Rica when this storm, this frenzy, what else would you call it, that happened, unbeknownst to you, right?
Well, the person who told Gwyneth about the conscious uncoupling work is a colleague. And I was on my way to Costa Rica to write the book proposal for conscious uncoupling. We'd been teaching it online as an online program for a few years at that point, and it had maybe 1,000 people. We were still kind of incubating the program. And he had called me right as I was leaving for the airport, and I said to my assistant, tell him I'll call him when I get back. And I went to the most remote place I could think of to go write this book proposal. And somebody wrote me an email, and you could only go to like one room in this yoga center down in Costa Rica to get your emails. And somebody sent me an email and said, hey, Gwyneth Paltrow just used your term to announce her divorce. And I wrote her back, I said, oh, isn't that nice?
That was it?
And within hours, like 12 hours, I went to bed. I for some reason, I woke up at 4 in the morning, which I never do. Like, I'm not one of those people that has a hard time sleeping. But I woke up at 4 in the morning. Even though there wasn't an internet signal in the place, I did have my phone, and I could open my emails from my phone. And my inbox was flooded from press around the world wanting to know the answer to one simple question, which is, what the heck is a conscious uncoupling?
So what did you tell them?
Well, I mean, I ended up basically going on to the Today Show. It was fun. It was like being shot out of a cannon. I mean, I arrived in New York with my, yoga flip-flops on in the middle with snow on the ground.
You really hit the ground running.
I did.
In
My little yoga T-shirts and flip-flops. I had to have someone meet me there with shoes and coats in the airport.
Isn't the universe interesting?
Oh my gosh.
The way it just goes
Well,
here.
I think we all have messages in us. Like we're all creatives here. We're all cultural creatives. I mean, that's really, we're doing our inner work and we're looking, how can we make a contribution of merit? We see what's happening in the world. We have solutions.
Right.
Or we have intuition about what would actually make things better. And I remember just feeling like I was like 30 months pregnant with this idea. Because I myself had been, so derailed in many ways. But of course it's all perfect. But through the ugly divorce of my own parents as I was growing up. And truthfully, it took me decades to recover from how nasty and ugly that divorce was. And they didn't even speak to each other till I was in my mid-40s, and I forced them to be in the same room. I mean, that's just how nasty it was. But I'm not that unusual. Because when the divorce revolution happened back in the 60s and took hold of America, before 1969, you couldn't actually get a divorce without going to court and proving that you'd been abused or abandoned or someone had cheated on you. You had to do that.
And
So
how many people wanted to do that? So they stayed stuck in marriages
they did stay stuck.
that they didn't
It
want to
was-
be in.
That's right. They were filled with shame, and it was just a horrible, ugly
Right.
process. So Ronald Reagan was the one who actually signed the first no-fault divorce law in California. He later called it the biggest mistake of his political career because it unleashed this avalanche of divorce in America, and nobody knew how to do it well.
Right.
And everybody was very unconsciously
Right.
uncoupling.
Right.
And so I think there's, so this idea of like, wow, there's really a better way to do this. And by the way, it's going to require some development from us
Right.
because we're all kind of entrenched in the goal, and it's unconscious for all of us, and we're all kind of buying into the happy ever after
Right.
myth.
Yeah.
So we just collectively have it like if somebody ends a relationship before one or both people die, that the relationship failed. And we go right into shame. And we go, and of course, if it's wrong and bad, then of course we have to make somebody wrong.
Right.
So this process is like an alternative to hostile divorces.
But I think the hostility that you talk about, because that was a very generational thing, and what you're describing sounds very, you're trapped. The whole idea of not feeling that you have the freedom to divorce like you have today. I mean, the different stages that it's evolved to. The whole notion of conscious divorce, let's say that. It is the uncoupling through divorce, because that's what you do.
Or breakup.
Or breakup, of course. It
Breakups are
doesn't.
hard on all of us.
Right, but that back then, what was festering and what was so wanting to come out and couldn't, that by the time you could divorce, it was pretty ugly because all that stuff needed to come up and out.
Well, I found a lot of things when I was researching. See, first of all, this happened because how many of you know me from Calling in the One? Okay, great. And we know that Calling in the One was from my own experience of how I created this great miracle with this wonderful man when I was in my early 40s. It started with a crazy declaration. I'm going to be engaged by my 42nd birthday, and my girlfriend Naomi turned to me. She said, okay, well, I'll support that, which was 8 months away, no prospects. Right? And she said, okay, I'll hold that for you if you give me permission to hold you accountable for being the woman you would need to be in order to be engaged by your 42nd birthday, which completely changed the game.
It's one thing to say, this is what I want to manifest. It's another thing to be held accountable.
Held accountable, like who would you need to be? But it
Right.
actually started me on this journey, like, okay, well, how am I the source of not being in a relationship? Which it was a really, great place to start.
Right.
And so instead of running out to try and find love, I went within to discover all of the ways that I'd been blocking it and defending against it, or creating drama as a substitute for love, and what would have motivated me to do that. So it started this whole deep process that became the Calling in the One process, and that I became internationally known for.
Right.
So then 10 years later, when I was divorcing my husband, I had a bit of a PR problem on my
I was going to I'm so glad you brought that up. I was going to say, what was that like? Here's this bring in the one, your soulmate, your life partner, expert. And then, but I think, well, isn't she human?
Well,
I'm
yeah.
sure you didn't hear just that.
No, I mean, truthfully, when we decided to divorce, I went to the park. I lay on the grass. I looked up at the sky, and I said the only prayer that made sense to me at the time was, what the F are you thinking? Like, seriously? This? I thought I was going to lose it all. But the truth is that I wanted to just live an authentic life, and I thought, well, I know I believe in calling in the one.
Right.
I'm pro-marriage.
Right.
Actually, I'm still pro-marriage.
And I know, and in Unconscious Coupling, you really talk about that. You say, what did I just say?
Unconscious coupling.
Okay. This could be a complete
it's a little bit of a
twist.
tongue twister.
Okay, so
it's a little bit of a tongue twister.
it
It's
is.
true.
So in conscious
Uncoupling.
uncoupling. Let's everybody say that together.
Conscious
uncoupling.
uncoupling.
Okay, so when I read your book, you were very generous and very honest about really advocating for keeping married for as long as you possibly can,
Absolutely.
authentically.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
love that.
Yeah.
Do you know that I felt that was seasoned throughout the book, and that, and you also said something that I thought was great, that
Conscious.
conscious uncoupling is, there's something that you have to think about. Does that make it easy to then part with someone? Because it's easy to do so if you have the license in a conscious way.
Well, so what it is a lot of people will stay in relationships because they would feel ashamed.
Right.
If they were suddenly, out of a long-term marriage, and it's really inside of this failure.
Right. Well, let's talk about failure, because we could talk about that for a while. That we're critical as it is. We don't even have to go through a separation or a divorce. We've got that. We have the inner critic, and it can be very brutal. So now you deal with the idea of separating, divorcing, and that really can be just even more brutal in that
Right.
what failure connotes and what that brings up in ourselves.
Well, so guilt is when we violate our own standards. We know something is wrong. We did something that kind of is against our own value system. But shame is actually when we do something that's against the values of the culture around us, the culture that we come from. So our
Right.
family, or what the rule is in our social group, or so we feel this sense of collective shame. And I'm just curious, anybody know what I'm talking about, that feeling like you failed and you're ashamed of something, just if you've had a breakup? Yeah, it's pretty much in the collective. Well, I got curious about that when it came up for me, because I've worked with a lot of people at that point, and I know that it's not just me that
Right, of
feels this
course.
way, that this is a collective experience.
Right.
And so I got kind of irritated with it, and I asked myself, wait a minute, whose standards am I holding myself accountable to, and is that my actual values? So it started me researching the happy ever after myth. Like, where did that myth even come from? And in my research, I found that it was 400 years old. It was first created in, dig this, Venice, Italy, which is still the romance
Oh, the
capital of the
romantics.
world, right? But the life conditions of the day in Venice, Italy, were that the lifespan, first of all, was under 40 years of age. And that was everywhere. The lifespan was under 40 years of age. And in Venice, that was largely because half the children were dying by the age of 16.
Right.
So only half of the people that were born got to be adults. So in that kind of a situation, you might consider that two parents raising a child would give them a better opportunity to stay together. Plus, there was a very severe class discrepancy. So you had the nobles and then you had the commoners. And if you were born as a commoner, you were born into poverty, and you would never, ever, ever get out of poverty. And mostly that was because there was a law in the books that a noble person could not marry a commoner. And if you look at all of the fairy tales, it's always about a commoner
Yes.
who marries royalty, and it solves all of the problems.
It's so
and
much more romantic
everyone
and more
lives happily ever
interesting.
after. So, but if you look at what's happening in our culture, the norm is now serial monogamy. That's the norm. I'm not advocating it. I'm just
Right.
reporting on the norm.
Right.
That very few of us will actually meet one person and mate with that person for life and live happily with that person forever. And the reality is that the majority of us will have at least 2 or 3 very significant relationships in our lifetime. So, I mean, even with our longer lifespans now, there are more people divorced over 50 than widowed. And that's the first time in human history we've ever had that statistic.
Mm-hmm.
So divorce, and we think that means that we're kind of going to hell in a handbasket. But actually, if you look at cultures over the years, anytime women have risen to equal power with men, divorce rates rise to this level. So people have seasons. Relationships on an organic level, relationships
Right.
have seasons.
Right.
So, you know, but inside of the happily ever after myth, we never learned how to do this well. The other term that might come close is amicable divorce.
Right.
But and the one regret I have about Gwyneth popping conscious uncoupling into the lexicon, even though obviously it's been a beautiful thing, and within the next day, by the way, this was so meaningful to me, just as a cultural creative who wants to make a contribution to the world, as I'm sure we all do. Is that the dictionary was in the dictionary the next day, the online, very reputable dictionary, as changing divorce in the as the changing face of divorce in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave like a new possibility just in the name
Right.
of how we could do this better. What people think of, though, is that they look at Gwyneth and Chris and they think, oh, it's just 2 people who want to have a nice divorce. It's not really. It's actually for anyone who's suffering with a broken heart. And most of the people who do it are individuals. Because I have found in my own life that when we have a broken heart, we're either going to do one of 2 things. We're going to contract, and we're going to pull away from life. We're going to be reticent to open our heart up again and take the risk of love in the way that we have before, or we're going to learn from the experience. We're going to heal what needs to be healed, what's up for healing. We're going to expand our capacity to love and be loved moving forward so we can have much healthier, happier relationships moving forward. So it will expand us. So it's either going to contract us or expand us. So conscious uncoupling works on 2 levels. It's definitely a stand for more conscious breakups. And it's also, though, for the individual who's going through a broken heart, because it really, kind of crawls into the center of what that is. And the reason why more people don't have amicable divorces is because we collectively don't actually have the development that we would need. There's parts of us that are still very primitive. And when we have what we call a rupture of attachment, which is what a breakup is, what happens is that we get deregulated. Our emotions go crazy, and our physiology goes crazy. The brain chemistry of a person undergoing a breakup is the same as a person who's undergoing the death of a loved one. And we go into fight or flight, and we feel like our life is being threatened. That's where we go.
Right. Let me ask you something. Divorce back in the day, when it was difficult and people didn't talk about it, and it was the D word, it was hush hush, and it wasn't easy to get a divorce. What still stands, in the legal terms of divorce is the reasons for divorce, irreconcilable differences. And I always thought, irreconcilable differences, what does that mean, really? Do you know? Is that really the criteria to get divorced? That you have to have these irreconcilable, these differences between you that you can't reconcile, that you can't find solutions to. So that was something that was always sort of very auto-hypnotic. Divorce, and the reason why they divorced because they had irreconcilable differences. And today, if you fast forward to today, and you take an example like Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, not just to use them or to overuse them, because so many people are also having conscious uncoupling that aren't in the spotlight, and they're doing it very elegantly and very respectfully and very compassionately. But the other thing I think related to shame and criticism of oneself is this a reason for divorce? So we've got irreconcilable differences somewhere over here, whatever that is. I mean, how would you describe that versus, oh, they don't put the cap on the toothpaste, so I'm getting a divorce? Like somewhere between these extremes of having to qualify your reasons for wanting to separate with somebody. Do you know, that to me is not talked about a lot. That maybe it is shameful to say, I'm not in love with this person anymore, or I don't like the fact that they insist on sleeping on the right side of the bed, and I want that side of the bed. I mean, people have overall, I think, they haven't felt comfortable talking about why, that it's okay, that it's acceptable to just not want to be with somebody anymore.
Well, one of the things that I'm most proud of around conscious uncoupling is that many people who go through the program learn things in the program that actually make it possible to go back and reconcile and have a much better experience. So there's certain development that's missing for us all, truthfully. We're evolving creatures. We're ever evolving, ever growing. And sometimes people get stuck in their development and they really can't get beyond it, and they get into a cycle of rewounding each other. And then, they either, and that's the only thing they can think of to do to fix this. But I think we're also talking in kind of our postmodern world here about values differences. And one of the things that's unique to our time and our culture is that we tend to change value systems. And I know for myself, I'm a very different person than I was when I was 18. And I'm a very different person than I was when I was 41.
Right.
And I'm, what I mean, like I'm a different person, I don't mean on a core personality level as much as the value systems, the things that I hold dear, the things that I aspire to and organize my life around are very different. That's very unique to our time. If you lived in Venice, Italy, 400 years ago, your life span was 40, and not a lot was going to change. Part of why we're changing so quickly is because we spread ideas very quickly. And ideas is what spurs evolution. And so particularly with the internet and in America in particular, or most of the Western cultures, but in America in particular, we have warring value systems. So we really value family in America. We value marriage. We're one of the highest marriage rates in the whole world. So even though we're one of the highest divorce rates, we still believe in love and we value family.
Sure.
But we also value personal development. And
So why
sometimes
can't that be intertwined? Why
well,
can't
because
that?
very often personal development will mean a value shift.
Right.
And that's where you can't reconcile with someone to create a machinery like we're in this together. We see things, we know what the goal is. We're at least in the same ballpark with money and where we're going to live or how we're going to raise our children. So there's personality conflicts, which we're always going to have, but that's what's unique to our time has to do with these value shifts. And those become challenging. And they will happen to those of us who are on a growth path. And what I say is if you're with a partner and there's a value shift, you have to really work hard to lean in and care about the other person's shift and then do the work to make space for those differences, to articulate those differences, to honor the differences in each other. That's a deliberate way of growing together.
Right.
But it doesn't just happen.
Two people entering into a relationship mindfully and entering into a relationship knowing that type of self-growth will continue and you're committed, you don't know really. We can't foresee. I mean, even calling in the one who you called in when you called in your husband, you might not want to call in now. And you didn't foresee what might have come up in your union together, even though you had your vision board. I'm not saying you had a vision board, but your list or whatever it is that you want to call in, that can change at any given time.
Well, and that's what I say in the book is I actually really changed. I mean, we got into our women's empowerment work, and we were in love. And I say we, it's a group of us. Lena was in that group. She's right here. We've been together for over a decade. And we were just working with thousands of women, but it was like, creating the distinctions of empowerment. And my husband just wasn't interested, which was fine. It didn't bother me that he wasn't that interested. It was my thing. But what I didn't realize, and we're all growing. So what I now know in hindsight, when I look back at my marriage, I think, wow, I thought that was small, that I was growing like this, leaps and bounds, and that he didn't really have an interest in it. And I didn't really make an effort to bring him more into my world or really make an effort to, I didn't quite understand that. I think I would do that now because I understand, what was missing. But we really did grow apart, and at that point we were, we have a great relationship, actually.
I know, it sounds like it. Do you mind sharing that? Because
I
think
have
it's
a wonderful.
great.
Sometimes
the
I
way
wish
you
there was
guys
a
are doing
camera
it.
rolling on us all the time because we're so sweet with each other. First of all, we made the decision when we decided to get unmarried that we wanted our daughter to have a happy childhood, and so we just got curious, well, what would that look like? Because he came from an ugly divorce too. And both of us had parental alienation, meaning I lost contact with my father, he lost contact with his mother because of it. So we really aligned on that. So no matter what we were going through, we just decided that we were going to figure it out because we didn't have a lot of role models. Well, today, we live in the same apartment building. And so he lives, my daughter actually lives on the 4th floor, and I live on the 9th floor, and she just kind of goes back and forth at will. And
I think you're onto something.
it's great. We don't have a custody arrangement. It never made sense to us to do that.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to have a happy child, what made sense to me is she always has access to both of her parents.
Right.
So she doesn't have to choose one family or the other, and she never has to feel like she's losing her mother to go to her dad's house or losing her father to come to my house. But how did we create this? Well, first of all, Mark is a very peace-loving person. He's a great human being.
Can I ask you, though, did you go through different stages? Because I want to
Yes.
cover, I know we can't cover all of the aspects of unconscious. If I say that one more time. Conscious. Well, you have to be unconscious before you get conscious.
There you go. That's okay.
Isn't that the way
That's
it works? Because you can't become, you could become unconscious after you get conscious, and the universe can remind you of that.
We could have a whole different conversation about that. That's a really deep dive, what you're talking about.
Right? I'm
Right.
getting sort of,
Okay.
abstract here and existential.
Okay.
But anyway, yes. So, having said that,
Okay.
you went through the different stages, obviously, in your divorce. And you cover so much in the book of the different stages and the phases and the emotions and the difficulties and
You can't just go to a conscious place. You can't just say, we're going to just be at peace. Because you still have all the things going on in your body that are triggering you. Like, this is, warning, warning, you're going to die, get as much as you can. There's not enough to go around. All of that stuff is going on. So you have to learn how to, have your emotions, but not let your emotions have you.
Right.
And to realize that any of the actions that you take or the choices that you make at this time, you're probably going to be living with the consequences, plus your kid will be living with the consequences for many years to come. So how do we get our ethics in the driver's seat and not just our overwhelming emotions? So that's actually the first step of conscious uncoupling.
Was your conscious uncoupling, I got that right.
You
this time.
did.
Did you notice? Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Did your conscious uncoupling with Mark, was that more conscious than your past unconscious uncouplings? Because you were more conscious.
Well, if you read the book, you will see that there's a tremendous depths, into the hell of heartbreak. That didn't really come from my breakup with Mark. I was deeply disappointed, disoriented, scared, but the shattering breakup that of my of my past, or breakups plural of my past, and not doing it consciously at all, where you kind of 6 months later you find yourself telling the person off while you're driving down the freeway in your head, kind of breakup. Or 2 years later, looking for that person everywhere you go, and prolonged grief, or dreaming about someone for a decade. All of the kind of ways that relationships that are incomplete and that ended in toxic, horrible ways that we never got really resolved with inside ourselves can haunt us for decades. So I'm very well informed on that kind of breakup. So because I wrote the book to kind of deal with everyone and not just people who, happen to be married to such a lovely person as I was, so what happens when the other person is unconscious and hurling their projections at you, or making it difficult, or threatening you, and being, we all, to stand and know I'm going to be my best self as I go through this, and you don't get to define me. And I'm going to use this breakup to get my life out of this, because what would have me choose someone like that would be so devaluing and destructive and attacking when I tell them what I want, who doesn't care about my feelings of needs, who is treating me like a second-class citizen, who is lying to me. So even when you have those ugly things, even if it's 97% the other person's fault, you want to be super juicy interested in your 3%. Because it's in the 3% that we get to graduate, and we can trust ourselves again moving forward. So as long as we're blaming that other person, which is normal to do, because when you've been traumatized, the brain will ruminate and go over and over and over and tell the story over and when, now I understand, and when she did that or when he did that, that's what he really meant, and maybe he was cheating on me all back then, and this is what we're doing. We're trying to make sense of our world, and so we're retelling the story over and over again, but usually we're telling it from a victimized perspective, which means we're not graduating.
But then you have to consciously uncouple, even if it's by yourself,
Yes.
with the end of every relationship.
Every relationship. Even if somebody that you were in relationship with is hell-bent on going to war, or very married to their story about you and doesn't want anything to do with you, you can still get to a place where you are totally free.
Right, I
and
like
complete.
that a lot in the book about, doing your work, consciously uncoupling, even if you're not doing it as a couple, that you're doing it on your own.
Yeah.
That you are holding yourself responsible for that, so that you don't carry that accumulative 3% that becomes 6%, that becomes 12% into each and every relationship.
We will know. And you know how, and usually the 3% is pretty, it's pretty mild, like, well, I just didn't really speak up for myself, or, I tolerated a lot because I didn't want to rock the boat, or I ignored my intuitive knowing, or I skipped over the red flag. So a lot of the ways that we throw ourselves under the bus and set ourselves up for pain in life are very kind of covert. It's what we didn't do that's just as critical as noticing what we did. So there's a lot to look at. Once you actually open that Pandora's box, I promise you get uninterested in taking the other person's inventory, because there's so much to see.
Of course, yes, yeah.
But it's great. So this is, and then the other thing that you have an opportunity to do there, when you're kind of broken open like that, is you get to go back and look at the core beliefs that are getting triggered again, what you're making that breakup mean. I'll always be alone. No one will ever love me. See, I'm not good enough. So that story, then you ask yourself, what is that story? And how old am I in that story? Because that's an ancient story. And so we want to look at what we call the source fracture wound that's coming up in the breakup. And I give a whole way of, moving through that to also shift that self-sense, heal that wound at its core, so you can be liberated to really create much healthier, happier experiences in love moving forward. You can own your value. You can own your worthiness to love and be loved, and look at, what you would need to, how you would need to grow and develop to kind of outgrow those old patterns.
Okay, so we're going to open this up now for some Q&A. There's so much more I wanted to ask you. I mean, Conscious uncoupling can go on for days. We could talk about so much about the different aspects of becoming more self-aware, of learning, the great learning that takes place in our relationships and in heartbreak, and pain as being the great teacher, right? That's one of the greatest teachers of all. You know, it's a hard one, and it feels really sometimes unbearable. You know, heartbreak is one that can just render us completely feeling like we've experienced a death. And that is hard. And yet, I view relationships as the great way to learn. Do you know how we mirror each other, how we trigger each other, how we see each other, how we don't see each other, how we don't know how to get our needs met from one another, how all the hows and how not to, you know, the how-tos and the how not tos. And I do, like you as a life coach, I really support and champion relationships to do everything that you possibly can, especially if the love is still there. I mean, that is the hardest thing to witness, when people actually really love each other and they just can't seem to get it right. Do you know? And it's sad to see people decide to end it, even when they love each other, because they can't figure it out, you know? And of course we try and help in our ways with our work, but the work is obviously within each and every one of us, in our relationships to ourselves and our relationships to one another. So there were more areas that I wanted to cover with you. I wanted to go into all the different emotional places that, you know, we go to, but I think we covered a lot, and I want to open it up to have you ask Katherine and I some questions that you might have, and go from there. So does anybody have any questions for us?
When I started reading your book, which I'm reading slowly because I don't want it to finish, what I noticed was, even though the title is Conscious Uncoupling, to me it also seems like a manual about how to stay together. You know, I didn't look at it. I mean, I kept thinking, wow, if I had known, you know, if I would have really, you know, if I had just done this work, you know, if I had the motivation, or just the you know, just the direction to go into that work, that you know, I probably would have been, you know, would never have had the experiences that I had. I would have just been able to sustain the relationships that I wanted to sustain. Maybe, but that's the thing. I mean, I'm looking at that book as a manual on how to sustain and grow a relationship by virtue of going inward.
Going deeper, yeah.
Thank you. I think that there is some development in Conscious Uncoupling book, like how to hold and contain our own feelings, how to take personal responsibility, how to live an intentional life, and the big one is how to see ourselves as the source of our experience. Because I don't think that most of us really understand the mechanisms of how we're creating our patterns. It kind of feels like it's just happening to us. And those ways of showing up that end up generating a certain pattern, end up enrolling someone to kind of play the role of, you know, whoever that, you know, would re-traumatize you in a certain way, or give you the message that you're not enough, or you're not valuable, or you're alone. How are we doing that? And it's outside of conscious awareness, and they're very subtle a lot of times how we're doing that. So the book is really about getting self-responsible and about getting conscious. And then also in steps 4 and 5, we're teaching relationship skills where you're actually dealing with the other person in a way that's going to de-escalate conflict and really clear the air, clear the field between you of any kind of toxic buildup. and toxic residue. And they're simple things. It's like, I know that for years when I had an argument with someone, I would try and, or a difference of opinion that wasn't getting cleared, I'd try to process it by like explaining why I did what I did and trying to get the other person to see it, why I was this way, and they needed to understand me. And I really was sincerely trying to clear things, but that never clears things. What clears it is actually listening to their experience, even when I don't agree with it. Mm-hmm. And just, validating that experience and caring enough to say, well, how could I make this better? What could I do to clean this up with you? So that's like an offer to make an amends. And then they're clear. And then we might have the conversation. Do you want to hear, like, what happened in my childhood that, kind of has me? But it's not with the thing that's going to clear the residue, right? So how do we even forgive each other when we're in long-term relationships? And how do we forgive each other when we're trying to, clear the air so that we can co-parent together, for example, and clean the residue up? Because we don't want to just be polite to each other, but have all that tension. Children understand, crossed arms.
Oh, of course.
They get it.
Behavior says so much. It speaks volumes. And they pick up everything anyway. This whole notion of staying married for the children, staying miserable for the children, what does that do?
Well, and there was a book out in the 90s called The Good Divorce by Constance Ahrens, and she was really a pioneer in this field, and she actually did a lot of research on what actually damages kids, and she demonstrated that it's not the divorce that damages children, that it's actually the unhealed hostility that festers over time, or the overt war that's happening between the parents. And John Gottman is a very well-known relationship expert, and he did a study where he followed the children of highly contentious parents who were married to each other.
Who stayed married?
Who stayed married, and the children were raised in that household with a lot of fighting and a lot of hostility between the parents. They had all the same things that the children from the broken homes with hostile parents. So it's not the divorce, it's the hostility that's not getting resolved between parents. So, this is very hard for us because there's a lot of yeah buts.
Yes. I just was saying that to somebody during our break. The yeah buts.
Yeah, but you don't know my former husband, or you don't. But so one of the things that I talk about in Conscious Uncoupling is the need for a very generous gesture to de-escalate hostility and turn things around. I talk about the power of generosity. Gen is the generate, genesis, generosity. The root gen means to create. So rather than being reactive to what's happening, you create a new possibility when you initiate a gesture of generosity. So one woman I was talking to had a former husband who just hated her. They had a 4-year-old. He was living with his new girlfriend, and he was nasty, and he would, going after custody of their kids, sole custody. I mean, he was on the warpath. And of course, she's traumatized by this experience, but it's her child, and she's a good mother. And so, he's making things up. So, she had to have a lot of strength to not react inside of that trauma. So that's when I said before, holding and containing, tending to your own inner experience with love and compassion before just acting on it. And so she was able to do that. And through the coaching that I gave her, he got sick, and she called his girlfriend, and she said, I heard through our son that he's not feeling well, and this is the soup recipe of what makes him feel better when he's sick, and I thought you might want to make that for him. So gestures like that started to calm everything down. She wasn't being a doormat. She did it for her son, but she was in charge. She was in charge, not him. We never want to give someone with a lesser consciousness control over who we're going to be, right? So, it's this form of spiritual mastery, but look, guess what? We're on the hot seat now. Your heart is breaking open. There's nowhere to go but spiritual growth.
Absolutely. Whether you're in a relationship or out of a relationship, you got to do the work. So you decide how you want to do it.
Right.
Do you know? Anybody else? Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
And thank you, Katherine. I love your book. My holistic doctor went through it, and she prescribed it to me. So, so I have known of your work for a while. I just wondered, since you're so public with, putting yourself in your books, this is Calling in the One about your great, calling in your great love of your life, and then Conscious Uncoupling, where you're undoing, the relationship with the love of your life. Where are you now? How is has your life unfolded with having done all this work? Are you now in your whole self and accepting of your life the way it is now, whatever it may be? I don't want to be getting into anything personal, but I just wondered how this has evolved for you.
Thank you so much.
That's a good question.
A lot of my work is inside of certain core principles. And I actually articulated 5 of them recently. And the first one is to live with intention. So rather than just kind of react in fear, to actually really take a moment, what am I committed to creating here? Because things will come up for us like it's a complaint, right? So then the response is, what would I rather create instead? The second one is to stay out of victimization. Take power by staying out of victimization. And that's a task, because we're all walking around kind of victimized. We get victimized even by our own psychology. I'm codependent, I have self-esteem issues. So to really, stay in an empowered relationship with whatever's happening. The second one is to relate to all breakdowns as though it's happening for you, as opposed to just to you or even against you. The third is to notice all your breakthroughs and to see yourself as the source of that, so you can do more of whatever you just did that created that breakthrough. And then the fifth one is to learn how to have to ask yourself empowered questions. Because one of the reasons why we don't self-examine and look at ourselves as the source is because the first question that we go when we make a mistake or something is in breakdown is we tend to ask ourselves very disempowered questions like, what's wrong with me? How could I be so stupid? So we ask ourselves questions that are not going to foster growth. And in fact, they're going to stunt our growth because they're going to foster shame. And we don't grow in an atmosphere of shame. So because I live in those principles, life is gorgeous, because circumstances don't dictate how I experience my life. Now, sometimes I'm in disagreement with my circumstances.
What does that look like? Tell us what that looks like, being in disagreement with our circumstances.
Well, I keep, we're all into, Julia Cameron created that practice of morning pages. I actually call them, for myself, I changed them for myself, and I teach a lot of my students to do this too, which is morning mentoring pages, meaning that I just kind of, whatever my complaint is of the day, when I don't like what's showing up, how come I don't have more money in my bank? How come no one's rubbing my feet in this moment? Why did I gain 5 pounds or whatever is going on? And then sometimes we're like big things are going on, right, for all of us. So then I shift and I say, okay, how do you see this, God? What's your perspective? And then I say, please write through my pen, thank you. And then I write a Dear Katherine letter back, and it's amazing what will come out. And whether we call that higher self, or we're really channeling spirit, or, and some people who have a hard time with the concept of God think of yourself as this, wise, elderly, 95-year-old, person who's now looking back and talking to you. But when we have access that wise part of it, everything gets reframed. And it really gets reframed as an opportunity for growth. And the bottom line of my life, and it's interesting because we have a lot of different ways of defining success. And I think that a lot of times we'll go to a default of defining success according to outside circumstances. Outside like conditions that we're not even fully aligned with. So we're kind of, there's chatter, like I'm supposed to be more than I am, or I'm supposed to have more money in the bank, or I'm supposed to be more accomplished than I am. But the truth is that if you look at your own soul, what this period of your life is about might be growth, development, cultivating kindness, understanding the human condition, doing volunteer work, making a difference, making a contribution. So we have to understand, really what we're up to in life. My biggest mission statement is to evolve my own and our collective capacity to love and be loved. So that's my game. So whether there's a man there or there's not a man there, or my kid's getting good grades or she's failing, or I'm sick or I'm not sick. I actually had cancer 2 years ago. I had breast cancer. It was an amazing experience. I can't even tell you how many gifts I got out of it. It was beautiful. And, we're all in it together. It's not like we ever arrive someplace. There are moments in all of our lives that are like peak experiences, and then we go back into valleys. And I think it's like our relationship to life and what that relationship is. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you. Oh, another question.
Beautiful.
I've noticed that in a lot of my girlfriends' relationships, there's a lot of bad behavior and lying, cheating, fault finding, a lot hypercritical, false perfectionism, and it's really out there. And when I'm watching people in relationship, I notice that person's not seeing their stuff, and the other person's not seeing their stuff. And it's really, and then also that people give ourselves permission to be unethical. And of course it's not going to work. It's going to unravel. Do you have any advice about, like, do you just self-protect and say, oh, got to run away from this. This is unethical. How much running do you do away from those bad, unethical behaviors? Cheating, lying, fault finding, you just constant fault finding, anger, adults yelling at 5-year-old children.
What's your name? Shalon. Thank you, Shalon. Did you want to answer any of that?
I'm going to give that one to you.
Okay.
I think that's a good one for you. And that's going to be our last question. So we're going to wrap it up after that. Okay. And
so my work always really is going to be looking at how we are the self, how we are the source of our own experience, only because it's the most powerful place that I know we can be standing. So, first of all, if someone is lying to me and then I discover it, it's not that I'm not human, so I'm going to feel shocked and scared and angry, and I'll go through all the experience of not trusting that person, right? So it's not like we're not human because somebody just did something that actually did victimize me. Right. So, but where I'm going to have the power to evolve beyond that toxic cycle, because we all know I could get rid of that lying bastard, right? Yeah. But then who am I going to date 6 months from now? It's going to be another different kind of lie. But there's still no truth-telling that I can really trust. It's going to be untrustworthy in a different way. So the most powerful place that I know to stand is to say, okay, how am I lying to myself? Who am I lying to? What's my relationship to truth? What am I turning away from? What happens when I know something isn't right? Do I ask the person about it and go into inquiry with them? Or do I just kind of skip over that red flag because I don't want to rock the boat? So that's where we can graduate. Now, if you graduate from that, you'll probably get into another relationship with someone who wants to lie to you, because life can only, this is really important, everybody, life can only evolve through us. It can't just happen to us. So a lot of times we'll do our work and we'll say, okay, now the next person I meet is going to be different. But it's almost like life can't evolve until we make a different choice. So the first time someone says something to you that feels like a lie, you say, something's not right about that statement. So we need to talk about that, because I'm not feeling flat about that. Right? And until it gets clear and something gets on the table, then either that person, I'm going to choose to not be with them because they're not coming clean, which means that, guess what, it's disappointing, but it's graduation day. And then at some point I just stop being interested in those people, because I can kind of smell it a mile away and I'm just not interested. I have no interest in it anymore. And then I'm able to form a healthier relationship. So it's a process of graduating ourselves. And you see how much work is involved there. So, try and take the other person's inventory and why they're messed up. I try and keep that to a minimum.
Say something about that. It's like, okay, so you have this feeling with somebody who's untrustworthy. Okay, cool. You just lied to me. This aspect of you is untrustworthy. But no matter what they're up to, trust me.
Yeah, I trust me. That's very good. So that's so what Shalon is saying is you have to get to a place. When people are betrayed and then they feel like when we're betrayed and we feel like I can't trust men moving forward, it's really like I need to be able to trust me. I need to be able to trust my judgment, trust that I can engage things that need to be engaged. I can tell the truth. I can show up for myself. I can set healthy boundaries. And that's what makes us capable of loving and gives us the courage to try again with someone new. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done with our questions and our comments. So do we have time for a closing meditation? Great. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Katherine.
And I want to thank you. It's so lovely what you've created here. I'm really honored to be a guest in your home here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you to Mystic Journey Bookstore for hosting me and hosting us all together collectively. And thank you again to Ben Decker and Jules Nugent for putting this together. All right, on that note, why don't we end with another meditation, and if there's any questions that you have more.
Oh, I just want to tell you.
Hold on.
Thank you. Layla's just reminding me. Is this on? Layla is my program director for my Conscious Uncoupling coach training, and we have a coach training this summer, and we would love to talk to anyone who's interested in it. You can find out about it if you go to ConsciousUncoupling.com. There's a big... Yeah, well, it's Conscious Uncoupling Institute goes right there, but there's a big banner right on ConsciousUncoupling.com. And we're going to waive, if you mention Ora's name, we will waive the $75 application fee. And so that would just give you an opportunity to tell us who you are and then set up an appointment with Layla to find out about it.
I love being a part of that.
Yes, just mention Ora's name.
I love
That's the
that.
secret
Okay, yes,
Thank
yes.
you. And that goes for
okay.
people listening too.
Yeah,
From being with us
okay, all
in our
right.
virtual audience.
Yes, those that are on Facebook Live, correct? And anybody who's out there that we don't see you, this pertains to you. So,
But we feel you.
yeah, we know you're there.
And we love you.
Okay. All right. On that note, let's thank you again, everybody. Okay. Do we have some wonderful ambient music we can put on and bring our focus and our awareness now back to the moment of releasing our thoughts, releasing our mental activity, and just letting go of overthinking, over figuring it out, over wanting to have all the answers right now. Just allow yourself to be present in this moment and to accept whatever is, whatever that is for you. Feeling that deep place within that allows for stillness and relaxation and not even having to know anything. Simply connecting to your breath and letting yourself just be. Taking a deep breath in and let it go. Big release of letting go, not holding on to anything, feeling an incredible lightness of being. Giving your mind a rest, a well-deserved rest. Another deep breath in and let it go. More releasing, more letting go. Not holding on to anything. We don't have to hold on to one thing. We just give ourselves the permission to take time in our day to let it all just go. Feeling ourselves in the moment with acceptance, non-judgment, and self-love. That we are enough in this moment. There's no need for more. This is enough, whatever this is for you. If it's just being your most true, authentic self, your spirit feeling free to just be. Feeling what it means to show up in the moment that you're in. Who is showing up? Who do you have to be? If the emptiness of letting go is enough, then allow that. The beauty and the freedom of acceptance, allowing, free falling into this moment of now, letting yourself go deeper and deeper into your being of acceptance and love. I am enough. I am enough. And I am free in this moment of acceptance. Can you feel the freedom of surrendering to the moment of now? It feels light, unweighty, unburdened. And this is who we are when we allow ourselves to just be enough. Feel your radiance, your light, your deep knowing of what is. Unattachment of anything that weighs you down. Let it go. Let it go. Give yourself permission to just let go. And feel what's there in its place. The stillness, the stillness, the inner stillness. Remember this feeling. It is always there. And when you call upon it, it will be there for you. The stillness, the knowing, the stillness, the knowing. And when you're ready, bring your focus and your awareness back to your body, grounded in this space. And take this knowing into all the moments to come. Go at your own pace and open your eyes when you feel ready.